An exciting privilege for us today to conduct a short interview with Mr. Bill Carson. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you. I thought we would start off with a kind of the great question of what was your first association with Leo Fender?
Well, the first association was me beating on his door trying to get one of his guitars. I'd seen it up in the Oakland, California area and played it, and it was so different that I wanted one. And he had a little tin roof shack out there in an orange grove, and I went out to make his acquaintance and wound up buying one and an amplifier. He used my ears over a long period of years, and I was a guinea pig. And we later on he took some of my ideas and made a guitar out of it.
Were you a part of that planning procedure? I'm assuming we're talking about the Stratocaster.
Yeah, originally it was called Carson's guitar. I wanted something more than the Broadcaster. Later it was called a Telecaster, and it had some things that didn't appeal to me, and I sawed it up considerably, and it became even uglier than what it was. And Leo couldn't understand it got into my ribs pretty badly because I was doing a lot of sit-down work, both in studio session work and as well as on the gig with groups, and it wouldn't intonate. The bridges weren't right because you had two strings over a fixed bridge and you couldn't tune it or intonate it. And out of that we got to six bridges. And Leo, not being a player, and he was pitch deaf in the sense that he couldn't tune anything, and it was really difficult to get an idea across to him. But he was such a clever man, and he was very plodding and relentless as a thinker. But once you could get your ideas across to him, he could make it. I couldn't make it, and he could, whatever it was that I wanted. And so he made me my guitar, and later on another instrument was needed in the line, and they decided to put that one in the line, and then it became the Stratocaster after that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I think he probably gave more to the music business than any other person that I know of.
Did you expect it to be as successful as it was?
Oh no, it was very ugly, and nobody liked it but me. But you could play it in tune. In those days, you played a lot of lead lines with a brass section or maybe a reed section. And if you played out of tune, the producer wouldn't call you back. So it was a matter of livelihood. You had to have something that worked. And you didn't do that with any other instrument. And also, I needed something with a vibrato that would come back to pitch, because if you could play little steel guitar glisses in conjunction with a tone and volume foot pedal, you could sometimes get paid double for steel guitar on the same session. Mm-hmm. So that was a necessity. And there were two on the market, two vibrato units, and neither one of them would come back to pitch. They weren't worth a flip. But Leo designed two. The first one wasn't any good, and the second one was as we know it today. It's never been changed. The bridge saddles have never been changed. We've attempted it 2 or 3 times, but we always come back to the same original stuff. We give it facelifts, and we try to improve it a little bit at a time, and we do that consistently all the time, because one thing is that we have so many items, even just shelf items like pots and wire and stuff like this are so much better than they used to be. Boy, our old pickups were so noisy and the wire was so leaky. Engineers used to see me coming into studios, they'd run to get a ground wire first thing because they knew it was going to be a noisy session. But our instruments are so far ahead of what they were in those days.
Well, it seems to me that, the Carson guitar, for example, the first one that you designed, how was it, what was changed when the Strat came out? Were there things that were on your original guitar that didn't make it to the Stratocaster?
Well, some of the things that were changed were The fact that my prototype didn't have any plating on anything except the neck plate and the keys, and there was no finish on it. Obviously, we went to dress it up with the sunburst finish and to put finish on the neck and this sort of thing. And later on, we got into custom colors, and we have done some changes for neck sizes, neck widths, and the hand sanders who do the necks, well, at least in those days, they called the final shot on how a neck would feel. And most of these guys were players themselves, and still are. Through Fender, it's shot full of players. And they've got their own ideas, a lot of, as to how a neck should feel. And most of them are right on the money. And you find very little variations in Fender necks anywhere on the wall. But in those days, there were some greater variations than there are today. And of course, we have improved pickups, potentiometers, and a lot of other things over the years, yes.
And of course, the trademark twin horns. Do you recall how that came about?
Well, the top horn grew and grew because originally there was no horn up there, and it wouldn't balance. It was always my theory that a guitar should hang on you and balance, and you not have to support it with your left hand or hold it down with your left hand to make it balance. It seemed like every instrument I'd had up until then, it was bottom heavy. On the lower bout, it would pull it down. So I would stand and shake my shoulders, and if the thing went, we would add more to this horn up here to make it balance. So it grew pretty long out there. And my old friend Freddie Tavares, who has passed long ago, he made the suggestion. He said it wouldn't be quite so ugly if you'd put a little horn on the bottom of it and make it a little more symmetrical. So I said, go ahead and do it if you want to. I don't really care. It just plays good, and as long as it balances, that's all I'm interested in. So that's how the two horns came about. And originally it was just chopped off down there. But we made another change in that Leo's first approach to the tremolo assembly and the bridge bar back there was he had it turned exactly backwards to where you would adjust from beneath the strings towards the tail end. And I took it out from the shop the first night and played it, and I called him on my first break, and I said, this thing is not going to work. It's terrible. If I break a string, I'll be here all night trying to fix it. And so I took it back the next day, and he and Freddie straightened it out and turned it around the way it is now, and it's been that way ever since. He was a very clever man once you could get the idea across to him. But Freddie Tavares was such a good right hand for Leo Fender. He was a man of the most personal and musical integrity that I've ever worked with. He's just very great.
And of course, you were there for the transition of the various amplifiers that Leo had a hand in creating. How did you see that process coming along?
Well, it came through the pressure of competition. I worked on and off with some road bands, and we picked up ideas that were happening around the country. And again, musicians have always fed have been the conduit that fed back into Fender to get the necessary information to continually improve the product line. And this was a very good amplifier line, and we were in one given situation, I felt like competition was kind of beating our ears down. And I called Leo, we were somewhere in Canada at the time, and I said, this amplifier is just stomping my amp to death. And he said, you'll have 2 new ones in Oklahoma City by the time you get there. And we did, and they were twins. That was the first time we produced twins. And believe me, nobody outgunned us from that day on. it got loud.
Yeah.
and it was feedback from players. And it was a great era to live through, and it still is. I've enjoyed rubbing shoulders, even though, with all the various players that there are of the various genres of music. and without having to catch the bus and drive 600 miles.
If I can ask you a little bit about your playing career, tell us about was the guitar the first instrument that you played?
Yes, yes, it was.
And what did you start off with? Do you recall?
The type or the brand,
Yeah.
it was out of a catalog, and it was a Gene Autry type, I believe. And after that, I went to a real expensive guitar. It was an Epiphone with a compensator, frequency compensator bridge, I believe is what they called it. Oh, it was a beautiful instrument. But it was fat. It dug in my ribs. It was fat. You had to had to dig over like that. But it was a good instrument. But after I played that broadcaster, and then I felt like I was kind of scratching my stomach a little bit. It was so thin. It takes a while to make the progression from a thick body guitar to a thin one, and that's one reason I was a little bit uncomfortable with the Telecaster. That's why I sawed it up on the back and the front, and why we got the Carson guitar going is because I made the guitar the way I wanted it to be, and evidently a whole lot of other people liked it that way too, because I guess it's the most copied guitar there ever was. We see a whole lot of copies coming from all over the world. I told Leo one time, I hate it because all these offshore companies copy the Stratocaster. Why don't they get some designs of their own? And he said, you know, if you'll think in terms of how many children that design is feeding and how many are being educated and how many homes are being paid for and cars are being bought, you might think a little differently about it. That was his philosophy about things like that. He was very down to earth about the way he equated things, and I looked at it differently after that. He held no grudge about things being knocked off like that for being replicated of design. Although their patent wars fought all the time, you know, on that kind of stuff. He didn't care about it one way or the other. He liked the back end of the business, and until he died, he went to work. And his mind was such that he didn't really know too much what he was doing. He had an old breadboard model of guitar. It had a first and a sixth string on it, and he would run a pickup underneath that to test the resonance points of the pickup, nodal points as to where the hot spots or the gathering points were on it. And that's of course, electronically we do it a lot different, but that's the way we used to do it in the old days. And he would go back in his thinking to those days, and he enjoyed going to work and doing that, and that's what he was allowed to do. And I expect that's what he did 2 hours before he died. He was a great man.
And so after the enormous success of the Strat, what direction did your career go in?
Well, I've been with Fender all my adult life, and I'm still with Fender in a consultant capacity. I'm the oldest guy with the company that goes back to those days, and I have an idea that's why they keep me around, because they ask questions that nobody else can answer. No, Fender has always been good to its more senior employees, and we've got quite a few of them, and we like to continue that wealth in the sense that it's our responsibility and our benchmark to establish a company that will stay in perpetuity as nearly as we can keep it good and healthy for the younger folks that's coming up that can raise their families and make a living with the Fender company and do a good job of keeping us leading the pack and on top of the heap.
And you've done that.
Yes, sir. We think we have. We've done a pretty good job, and we'd like to keep on doing it.
Did I miss anything?
No. That's all you want to talk about.
Well,
I hold the world's record for the biggest watermelon, have for 10 years.
Okay, tell me about it. Have you? I haven't heard about this.
Did you?
Tell us about the watermelon.
All right. I decided to be in the Guinness Book of World Records, so my kids and my wife could have something to talk about. And after I searched my conscience of what do I know that I could do that in and looked at that book, I decided I had been raised on a farm. I knew a little bit about growing things, so I picked watermelons. And it took me 10 years to get up to where I was a real threat to it. And about the 11th year, I got in the book. That was in 1990, and it weighed 262 pounds. And I've held the record ever since, and I've held it longer than anybody since. I'm still in there since 1990 at 262 pounds. And I've tried every year, and I'm trying this year. If I don't break my record this year, I'm calling it quits, because my eyesight is bad enough that I can't really compete anymore. It takes a lot of work, and vision is a part of that. But it's been good competition, and I've enjoyed it.
So what are the tricks here?
Oh, a lot of work, and building on the genetics of the species. It's quite involved. You don't just throw a few seeds at the ground and jump back.
It's knowing exactly when to water and...
Well, water and a combination of food and nutrients that you feed through a system. And temperature is one of the factors. The amount of rainfall that you get, all rainfall has got a certain percent of nitrogen in it, so you have to back off all nitrogen that you're feeding through the system if you get a lot of rainfall. And just kind of common sense approach to the thing.
Which one was harder, the watermelon or the Strat?
The watermelon's much harder. I knew what I wanted in the Strat. The watermelon by far the greatest success for me. I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't agree with that, but
Probably not, no.
the Strat was easy because I just knew in my head what was needed. Intonation with Leo, and whether you use this or not is beside the point, but just as an aside, intonation didn't mean anything to Leo. He did not understand that the distance between the string was a physics problem, and that you pressed the string down, that you sharpened the pitch of it when you pressed it to the fret, and that you had to allow for that sharpness with the bridge, wherever the bridge is set. And Freddie Tavares finally explained that to him mathematically to where he could get it, and with a formula. And once he got it, well, then he made the bridges, and we started to horizontally and vertically adjust these bridges. The only thing that I didn't get, well, not the only thing, there's two things that I didn't get. I wanted 4 pickups, and he said there's not room to put the 4th pickup there and get all the nodal points that we should be getting. The best way to change tones selections in those days was to have a pickup in a different position. And so that's one reason, the main reason I wanted 4 pickups instead of 3. So he knocked the 4th pickup out of the saddle, and I didn't really like that, but I settled for 3. And a guy named Paul Bigsby, who was a builder out there, had built a guitar for a friend of mine, a guy named Merle Travis, who was pretty popular in those days. And it had a real elaborate headstock. It was like an exaggerated fiddle head almost, violin scroll. And I wanted that headstock on my guitar to give it a little bit more balance. And then when it got so ugly, I didn't care after that. And he said the headstock would be too hard to make, so he just cut it down to what it is now. And so I didn't get that. But the other main thing was that in flatting and sharpening a chord, to sharp a chord or flat it, I wanted the integrity of the chord to stay put. Like if you were in B flat and you flatted it a half step to A, I wanted the whole chord to be in tune when you flatted it, instead of some notes going out of the chord. And same way sharpen it, like you would a steel guitar bar. And he made some things, he called them string pawls. They looked like question marks almost, and a bar ran through them, square bar. And each one had a specific radius on it, and it worked. But there went my system of raising and lowering the bridge saddles back and forth. And so I could have one or the other, but not both. said, "The heck with that, you know, I'll do without that." And we took the individual bridge saddle to where you could really intonate the guitar properly, and we never did that. And then he got the idea, Leo Fender got the idea that if we're going to use this vibrato system, that to eliminate all friction, we should have roller nuts up at the end of it. I took it to the job and it sounded like a cheap banjo. I told him in the beginning, Leo, we don't need that. Yeah, you do. You need it. And half the string signal ran to all those roller nuts and that axle that ran through it, and it died. The string oscillation would just decay and die. And so at 10:30, I called him. This thing's not going to fly. So, and they'd already tooled up for that. He thought that was good, strong enough that we could just tool up and go with it. Because by that time, Don Randall was in on the scene. He was president of Fender Sales, and he was pushing for another guitar in the end of the line. Mm-hmm. And they decided they'd just go ahead and put my guitar into production. Leo would have still owned the company way beyond the sale of CBS had his health not failed him. He became very ill. He had a sinus condition and a lodged bacteria that they couldn't seem to shake loose. But he was very dogmatic in his choice of a chiropractor that would not adhere to antibiotics. And he almost died. He thought he was going to, and the doctor he was going to see was not there for an appointment one day, and he got mad and went to another guy who started giving him massive doses of penicillin and cured him. But by that time it was too late. The company was already on market. Don Randall, Leo was a very poor businessman. He was going to sell it for a lot less than what it brought, and Don Randall said, let me see if I can't get a lot more money for this, and he did. CBS was a well-meaning, deep-pocketed company, but they knew very little about music, the music industry. They bought, of course, a whole flock of musical instrument organizations to make a division for CBS for the image more than anything else, I believe. And Fender and Gemeinhardt Flutes were the only two companies within that division that made any money. And they just ran roughshod through all of these smaller companies that they bought up. They didn't know the difference, that their methods would have fit General Motors, and we're a little small potatoes thing out there like the rest of the companies that they were absorbing. And it was really rough for us to do any kind of turnaround. Bill Schultz was a godsend to us. He is one of the smartest men that I have known in the music business. He has really done a lot for this company. Bill Schultz is one market-savvy guy, and he cares about people. And that's what Fender's all about, is people. Like he said, it's not morks and bricks and mortar, I'll get it straight. And the size of the building and the square feet, it's people.
So what I want to know is, what was Leo Fender doing in the latter part of his life? Did he grow watermelons?
No, he was a backyard gardener, and we did some gardening things one time. And he also had an Owens boat that was built up in Sacramento. And he had it built to his specifications, and boy, they hated to see him coming because they'd have to tear it down about half the time, and it might be 2/3 done. They'd have to tear it down the keel sometime. But excuse me, he was so right in what he did. He only had one eye, of course, and his depth perception he didn't have any depth perception. So he wanted the boat, and instead of the boat coming up like so at an angle and then planing, he wanted the boat to rise up like this and plane. and he had two big Cummins diesels in it, and they were just standard shaft props through the keel, shafts and propellers like any other boat. But he designed this thing to where it would do exactly that. It would come up out of the water and do that. So the bow wasn't in his way. It wouldn't come up like that. It'd come up like this. And there was a Leo Fender design in their line for several years.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. But they sure hated to see him coming. But we went fishing together quite often. He liked to catch bonita. He had a cat. I bet that cat had 400 pounds of bonita in the deep freeze out in his garage. But he liked to garden, and I had a mutated squash one time. It's where two squash blooms grow together, and they're Siamese type vegetable like that, and it's just an accident. And I told him it was a strain that I'd developed, and I gave him some other squash seed, and he grew 3 plants, and he couldn't get a single one to come out that way, and he won't know what he was doing wrong. I never did tell him. We had things like that going all the time with him. Because he was dead serious about stuff like that, and it was fun to do things like that with him, on him.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think our time is about up. But again, thank you very much. I really
Thank you.
appreciate
It's
it.
been my pleasure.